In the heart of the Florida wetlands, where the air hums with cicadas and the water hides ancient predators, one moment changed everything. A young wildcat, just 4 months old with spots like dappled sunlight, would take the first trembling steps that no one thought possible. Steps toward the human who had risked everything to save her from the unthinkable. She'd been rescued from an alligator, but survival was only the beginning. This isn't just a story about an animal rescue. It's about trust rebuilt one heartbeat at a time, the bond between a wounded bobcat baby and the person she chose as her safe place, and the healing that flows both ways when love meets patience. What happened on that day, and in the long, quiet months that followed, will make you see wild animal rescue in a way you never have before. And when you witnessed the moment Luna pressed her paw into her savior's hand for the first time, well, you might find yourself holding your breath, trying not to cry. Luke Bennett didn't see the drop, not right away. What he saw was the way the small crowd on the observation deck froze mid-sentence. A father's hand stopped halfway to his son's shoulder. A schoolteacher's mouth stayed open in the middle of a word. All eyes were on a blur of spotted fur hanging high above the alligator pond. The blur was Luna, a wild bobcat baby barely 4 months old, light enough to be carried in one hand, but big enough to already have the muscle and reflexes of her species. The woman holding her later, identified as Caroline Marks, didn't hesitate. One moment Luna's paws were curled under her chest, her ears angled back in uncertainty. The next, air. Pure, terrifying air. Luke's mind registered two things at once, the splash that was about to happen and the sound that would follow the deep, guttural shift of an alligator waking to opportunity. There is a point in every animal rescue worker's life where training stops being theory. Luke had rehearsed dozens of emergency drills in his years running the Everglades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. But drills never involved the sheer wrongness of watching a creature who had just started trusting humans be tossed toward a predator. His boots moved before his thoughts caught up, shoving past the low rail and hitting the damp bank hard enough to jar his teeth. For those who have never stood that close to an alligator, here's something to know: they are faster than they look. Much faster. From the far end of the pond, a massive male began a slow, deliberate push through the water. He didn't need speed yet. He had calculation and instinct older than history. Luna hit the surface awkwardly, not the smooth, controlled entry of a hunting cat, but the splash of a creature fighting panic. She flailed for the edge, but the water didn't offer anything to grip. Bobcats are strong swimmers in the wild. Yes, but only when they choose the water. Only when their mind is calm. This was different. The deck erupted behind Luke, voices shouting, someone screaming for him not to go closer. He tuned it all out. In rescue work, there's no room for extra noise. He needed to calculate the closing distance between Luna and the gator, then cut it in half with each push of his arms. When he was later asked about that swim, Luke admitted he didn't remember the details. What he remembered was Luna's eyes, gold flecked with panic, locking onto his face. The rest was automatic. A rescue pole angled under her chest, a quick lift that kept her head above water, and the sideways jerk that made the alligator hesitate just long enough for Luke to back toward the bank. It would be tempting to frame this as pure heroism, but Luke didn't see it that way. You don't weigh the risk in moments like that, he would say later. You just see an animal you've sworn to protect, and you act. That truth, that there's often no pause between danger and decision, is something most rescuers know intimately. In another wildlife center, hundreds of miles away, a handler once sprinted into a road to block traffic so a stunned sandhill crane could be carried to safety. He didn't think about the cars. He thought about the crane's next breath. That's the nature of these split-second calls. You can't script them. You can only prepare your heart to be the kind that moves forward, not back. Luke's forward movement that day wasn't just about saving Luna from the alligator. It was about protecting what she represented. Luna wasn't a domestic pet or a tame show animal. She was a piece of the wild, injured and recovering her survival, a small stand against the tide of habitat loss and indifference. Losing her to a deliberate act of cruelty would have been more than a tragedy. It would have been a betrayal of everything the sanctuary stood for. The crowd didn't cheer when Luke reached the bank. They stayed silent, watching as he wrapped Luna in his shirt. her small body trembling against his chest. She didn't fight, she didn't scratch. She simply pressed her head under his chin as if the world made more sense there. That single act, a wild bobcat seeking safety in human arms, held more weight than most people on that deck realized. Rescuers talk often about the first trust, that instant an animal accepts your presence as safety rather than threat. It's rare with wildcats, and rarer still with those who've been through trauma. Luna's first trust wasn't born in a quiet feeding session or a slow approach in her enclosure. It was forged in the chaos of survival. And like most bonds built in urgency, it would demand care and consistency in the weeks to come if it was going to last. Later, Luke would find out that Caroline Marks hadn't stumbled into this moment by accident. She had been watching Luna's recovery for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to act. And that realization that someone could target a creature so vulnerable would change the way Luke thought about safety at the sanctuary forever. But in that first moment, standing on the muddy bank with water dripping from his arms, all Luke thought about was keeping Luna warm and breathing. He carried her past the gawking crowd without a word, straight toward the rehab building. Behind him, the alligator slid back under the surface, the ripples erasing the evidence as if nothing had happened. There's a small lesson here, one that doesn't need grand speeches. The smallest lives can depend on the fastest decision, and sometimes those decisions change the direction of more than just one life. For Luke, this was the start of something neither he nor Luna could have predicted, a journey that would test the limits of trust, patience, and what it truly means to protect the wild. In the quiet of the rehab room, as he placed her on soft blankets and felt her breathing slow, he realized the rescue wasn't over. In many ways, it had just begun. And it's here in those first minutes after the chaos that their real story starts. A story about loss, recovery, and the long road between the two. Because saving a life is one thing. Teaching it to live again, that's something else entirely. Next, we step back before the fall to see how Luke's quiet days and Luna's first steps at the sanctuary set the stage for that split-second decision. By the time Luna arrived at the Everglades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Luke Bennett had settled into a rhythm that most people would call predictable. For him, it was survival. Wake before sunrise, feed the injured birds in the flight barn, check the turtle tanks for clean filters, walk the perimeter to make sure the enclosures were secure. The small stilt house he lived in, no bigger than a 2-bedroom, sat at the edge of the property, close enough that he could hear the night calls of owls, but far enough to give the animals their quiet. The Everglades Center wasn't a glamorous place. It wasn't meant to be. It was a working sanctuary, built for function-sturdy enclosures, a small clinic, a rehab barn, and a patch of fenced wetlands where released animals could adjust before heading back to the wild. Most visitors only saw the front section where educational tours stopped to meet long-term residents who couldn't be released. Behind the gates, it was just work. Feeding, cleaning, mending fences, logging every change in behavior. Luke never minded the pace. In fact, after losing his wife 3 years earlier, he relied on it. He'd once told Emma Lawson, his assistant, that the routine was like rowing in fog. You don't need to see far ahead, you just need to keep moving. Emma, with her quick smile and knack for making volunteers feel at home, understood. She'd been there when Luke decided to take over the center full-time, pouring his grief into a place that demanded steady hands. Luna came in on a Tuesday morning, just as Luke was finishing rounds. A call from a local ranger, young Bobcat, no sign of the mother, likely hit by a car overnight. When Luke met the ranger at the gate, the sight hit him harder than he expected. The kitten's spots were bright against her dull, matted fur. She blinked slowly, the way injured wild cats do when they're too tired to fight. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. They carried her straight to Dr. Rachel Carter in the clinic. Carter was calm, deliberate. 20 years of wildlife medicine had taught her that animals read your energy before they trust your hands. She examined Luna quickly. Dehydration bruising one swollen paw. No fractures. She's lucky, Rachel said quietly. And Luke caught the unspoken part, lucky to have been found at all. Feeding a wild bobcat kitten is different from feeding a domestic cat. You can't just put down a dish and walk away. The first days are careful hydration with electrolyte solution, small portions of soft food timed feedings to match natural patterns. Emma logged every meal, noting how much Luna ate, whether she turned her head, whether she used her paw, or just her nose. Little details that told them how she was coping. It's easy to assume that wild animals can't connect to humans the way pets do, but Luke had seen enough to know that wasn't always true. The connection looks different. A bobcat's trust isn't wagging tails or eager licks. It's the way they stop retreating when you enter the room, the way their ears stay forward instead of flattening, the way they take food without a defensive growl. Luna wasn't there yet, but she watched him. That was something. One afternoon, while cleaning the rehab room, Luke noticed her eyes tracking his every move. Not in fear, but in curiosity. She was still weak, her movements slow, but there was intent there. He decided to try something. Instead of placing her food in the corner and leaving, he crouched nearby and set it down within arm's reach. He didn't move. She hesitated, then took a step forward, her paw barely touching the blanket before leaning in to eat. For a wild bobcat, that step meant more than it looked. Luke believed in celebrating small wins. It's a habit that keeps rescuers from burning out, especially when most animals don't make it. He'd learned it years earlier from a colleague in Montana who ran a raptor rehab. If a hawk hops to the perch today when yesterday, it wouldn't you celebrate that she'd told him. Small wins keep you going until the big one comes. Luna's first small win came on day 3 when she finished her entire meal without turning her back to him. By the end of the week, she would eat while Emma was in the room too. That was progress. It also meant her rehab could move to the next stage. Short periods outdoors in the enclosed run, where she could feel the grass under her paws and practice the low, precise movements bobcats are known for. In those first days, Luke often thought about the other animals they'd taken in that season. An osprey with a broken wing, a fox cub rescued from floodwaters, a turtle whose shell had been cracked by a boat propeller. Each had its own rhythm of healing. The bobcat's was different, not slower exactly, but layered. It wasn't just about physical recovery. For a young predator, confidence was part of survival. If Luna didn't rebuild, that release would be dangerous. Luke also knew the sanctuary had to balance Luna's needs with the expectations of the community. Visitors came wanting to see the wild cat baby they'd read about in the local paper. He kept those visits limited. Every human interaction had to be weighed. Did it help her adjust, or did it make her dependent? The goal was always release, unless her injuries or behavior made it impossible. And yet, as he watched Luna stalk a moth across the run one morning, Luke found himself wondering about the line between wild and safe. Could an animal learn to trust without losing the edge it needed to survive outside? It was a question he didn't have an answer for. One small but telling moment came when a group of school children toured the sanctuary. They stopped at the run, their voices hushed, as Luke explained how bobcats live in the wild, what they eat and why they're important for the ecosystem. Luna stayed in the shadow of a log at first. But then, one of the children, a quiet boy holding a sketchbook, sat cross-legged by the fence and began to draw her. Slowly, Luna moved closer, her nose twitching at the paper. She didn't reach the fence, but she didn't retreat either. It was another small win, and Luke tucked it away in his mind. Those days before the fall were a balance of routine and small surprises. Feed, clean, monitor, celebrate a curious glance, a quiet approach, a paw stretched toward the sunlight. There was nothing in those moments to suggest what was coming. But if you looked closely, you could see the threads being woven, the way Luna's gaze lingered on Luke, the way she stopped flattening her ears when he entered, the way she began to relax in his presence. The mystery was that trust, once it starts, can grow faster than you expect, and it can be tested just as quickly. If there's a lesson in this part of the story, it's that the work that matters most is often invisible to everyone but those doing it. The hours of careful feeding, the restraint in not rushing progress, the willingness to let the animal set the pace, none of it makes headlines. But without it, the dramatic rescues people remember wouldn't be possible. Luke didn't know it yet, but every quiet choice he made in those first days was building the foundation for a split-second decision that would test everything. The bond that was beginning in the calm would be called on in the chaos. And it would happen sooner than anyone imagined. Because one afternoon on a clear Florida day, the observation deck would fill with school children, the Gator Pond would seem just another part of the tour. And Caroline Marks would step forward carrying something the crowd didn't yet notice. When the deputies finally sat Luke down and explained what they'd learned about Caroline Marks, he realized this had never been about Luna alone. The attack hadn't been an impulsive act of cruelty. It had been deliberate, shaped by decades of something that looked like grief but had hardened into something else entirely. Caroline had lost a nephew when she was in her 40s, a boy named Daniel who had been attacked by a wild animal during a camping trip. The official report called it an accident. Daniel had wandered from camp at night, startled a predator, and been caught in that brief, irreversible moment where instinct takes over. Caroline had never accepted the explanation. In her mind, the animal wasn't just following nature's law. It was a killer. From that point on, she saw every bobcat, every wild predator as a threat waiting to happen again. For years, that belief stayed quiet. She moved through life politely enough, a retired school administrator, a volunteer at church, someone you might meet at the grocery store and never think twice about. But under the surface, she collected stories of attacks, articles about livestock losses, news clips about dangerous wildlife. She clipped them, filed them, and added her own handwritten notes in the margins. The detectives found binders in her home, each labeled with dates and places. Luke flipped through one later and saw how methodical it was. She'd circled names of sanctuaries, drawn maps of enclosure, layouts noted when certain animals were brought in. His own center was there too, under a tab marked Public Access. It's easy to say that such behavior is just madness, but Luke had seen something like it before. Years earlier, a man in another county had tried to poison a nesting pair of eagles. His reasoning: one had carried off a neighbor's small dog, and he'd decided the species itself didn't deserve to live near humans. The law stopped him, but the idea that one incident could condemn a whole kind of animal stayed with Luke. It was the same here tragedy turned into a blanket sentence. The deputies explained the challenge in Florida: harming a bobcat is illegal, but proving premeditation and intent can be hard without eyewitness accounts or direct evidence. What Caroline had done with Luna was clear to Luke, to the crowd who'd seen it, but in court the defense could spin it as a moment of confusion or startled reaction. She hadn't been caught on camera lifting the kitten high over her head. There were just human statements, and in legal terms, those can be contested. For Luke, hearing that was harder than hearing her motive, because it meant there were cracks in the system wide enough for people like Caroline to slip through. It made him think of all the times he'd told school children that wildlife laws existed to protect animals from harm, and how hollow those words would sound if Luna's attacker walked free. Emma took the news personally. She'd been the one logging Luna's meals, tracking every ounce she gained, celebrating the first time the kitten played with a leaf in her enclosure. "How do you hate something so small?" she asked, not looking at Luke. He didn't answer right away. There wasn't a good answer. But later, in the quiet of the clinic, Luke found himself thinking about a truth he'd learned the hard way: people don't always hate out of logic. Sometimes they hate out of pain. That doesn't excuse what they do with it, but it explains how it can go so deep it starts to feel like purpose. He remembered an old rancher he'd met in Montana during a relocation project for wolves. The man had lost livestock years earlier, and his view was simple: every wolf was a thief. But when Luke showed him photos of the relocated pack thriving in an area far from ranch land, the man studied them longer than expected. "Maybe some belong out there," he'd muttered. It wasn't a conversion, but it was a crack in the wall. That's what Luke kept circling back to with Caroline, the idea that somewhere in her past there had been a moment where she could have chosen a different way to carry her grief. She hadn't. And now a bobcat kitten had nearly paid for it with her life. For the community. Luna's attack stirred more than outrage. Letters came in from as far as Oregon, people sharing their own rescue animal stories, some about bobcats, others about dogs, hawks, even reptiles. One woman wrote about a gopher tortoise her father had saved from a highway, and how that act had taught her that even the smallest lives matter. The center's inbox was full of offers to help to donate, to send blankets or food, but not all the feedback was warm. A few locals sent clipped notes or left messages saying predators didn't belong anywhere near people rescued or not. One caller even claimed, "If you'd let nature take its course, the gator would have done us all a favor." Luke didn't bother calling them back. He knew that for some, fear and prejudice ran deeper than any conversation could reach in a day. If there's a lesson in all this, Luke thought it's that the work isn't just about rescuing animals from danger. It's about rescuing them from the stories people tell about them. Stories that can turn them into villains, into symbols of something they're not. And maybe that's the fresh perspective here when you work with wild animals. You learn that they aren't moral creatures in the human sense. They don't attack out of hate or malice. They respond to hunger, to threat, to instinct. People, on the other hand, can carry grudges for decades long after the original wound. That's why education matters as much as food and medicine in rescue work. Luna didn't know any of this, of course. She didn't know why a human had thrown her into the pond, or why another had pulled her out. She only knew that one of them had kept showing up afterward, bringing food, speaking softly, giving her space when she needed it. Her world was made up of actions, not motives. Luke envied her for that in a way, because he couldn't stop thinking about the binders, the maps, the notes in Caroline's tight handwriting. He couldn't stop wondering if there were others like her watching, waiting for their chance to act. That thought stayed with him long after the deputies left, long after the community's first wave of support settled into routine. It stayed with him in the middle of the night when he'd walk the perimeter with a flashlight pausing at Luna's enclosure, to see her sleeping shape curled under the shelter. He didn't know yet that Caroline's network extended beyond her, that others shared her belief and were willing to act on it. He didn't know that one of them had already been to the center after hours taking mental notes. But the threads were already moving, and soon they would tighten around more than just Luna's safety. Next, in the weeks that followed, healing became the focus not just for Luna's body, but for the fragile trust between them. That's where the work turned from adrenaline to patience, and where the bond that would be tested again began to truly take shape. Luna's recovery began in the quietest corners of the Everglades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the places visitors never saw. After the chaos of the Gator Pond, Luke knew her next chapter would be written not in headlines or viral clips, but in the slow, steady rhythm of care. Dr. Rachel Carter moved quickly after the rescue. Her exam was all business clean, the puncture marks on Luna's flank treat, a small tear near the base of her tail, run fluids to counter the stress and dehydration. Luke held the Bobcat still when needed, not gripping tight, but anchoring her with the same steady hand she'd felt in the water. Emma logged each step, noting Luna's heart rate, appetite, and the way she flinched at certain movements. Those flinches told their own story, a mind still replaying danger. Luke had seen this before. Animals pulled from traumatic situations often carry the memory in their muscles long after the wounds close. It might be a turtle that ducks at the shadow of a boat, or an owl that startles at the sound of a door hinge because it echoes the cage it was trapped in. For Luna, it was the way her body stiffened whenever someone entered too quickly, the way her eyes searched for an escape even when none was needed. The first week was about rebuilding her strength. Feedings were small but frequent minced rabbit meat mixed with vitamin supplements offered from a shallow dish placed just inside her reach. Luke stayed nearby, not forcing contact, but letting her grow used to the shape of him in her space. If she backed away, he waited. If she came closer, he didn't reward her with sudden movement. The lesson was simple, he was predictable, and predictability meant safety. Parallel to Luna's recovery, another patient occupied the rehab barn, Milo, a red-shouldered hawk with a fractured wing from a roadside accident. The contrast between them was sharp. Milo's progress was measurable wing stretches on day 4, short perching flights by week 2. Luna's milestones were subtler sometimes, so small only Emma noticed a tail flick in curiosity, a stretch toward the sun, a nap with her back exposed instead of pressed to the wall. In the evenings, Luke sometimes sat outside the enclosure with a notebook, jotting down what he called quiet wins. On one page, 814 took food while I stayed in full view. No growl. Another, 819, followed my movement across the room without retreating. To anyone else, it might look like nothing. To Luke, it was a record of a wild animal relearning trust one choice at a time. He remembered a case from years back, a raccoon kit that had been caught in a trap. Even after its paw healed, the animal refused to step on solid ground, convinced the pain would return. The only way forward was slow exposure, letting it rediscover the world in controlled doses. Luna needed the same, not a flood of human contact, but enough consistent presence to overwrite the memory of being thrown. Emma played her part carefully. She'd approach at feeding times with the same slow step, setting down the dish, speaking softly. When Luna took her first bite without looking over her shoulder, Emma grinned. "She's starting to believe us," she said. It wasn't a declaration of victory, just a marker on a long road. There's a lesson here for anyone working with animals, or people for that matter. Healing rarely happens on the rescuer's timetable. You can't demand trust. You can only offer it over and over, until the other side chooses to meet you halfway. Luke shared this perspective during a talk at a local school. He told the students about Luna's progress, about how bobcats play a vital role in keeping ecosystems balanced. One student raised her hand and asked if Luna would ever forget what happened. Luke paused. "She might not," he admitted. "But forgetting isn't the goal. The goal is for her to know that what happened once won't happen again. That's where the fresh perspective lies. Recovery isn't about erasing the past. It's about building enough safe experiences to outweigh it. For wild animals like Luna, that meant every meal, every calm interaction, every day without harm was a deposit in a bank of trust she could draw from later. By the second month, Luna's routine had expanded. She spent mornings in the outdoor run afternoons, resting in the shaded corner of her enclosure. Luke added small challenges, a log to climb over a suspended branch to test her balance. She took to them cautiously, testing each step before committing. Every now and then he'd catch her in a moment of pure, kitten-like play, batting at a falling leaf. Those moments reminded him why the quiet work mattered. Meanwhile, the world outside the sanctuary didn't slow down. Caroline Marks's case lingered in limbo, the legal process grinding forward without resolution. Luke didn't talk about it around Luna, not because she could understand the words, but because the sanctuary was meant to be her place of peace. Still, the unease lingered, an undercurrent in every after-hours patrol Luke made around the perimeter. One evening, while checking the rehab barn, Luke found Luna at the front of her enclosure, watching him. Not just glancing, watching with that steady, unblinking focus wildcats use when they're trying to understand something. He crouched, meeting her gaze. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. She didn't move, but her ears stayed forward. That was enough. Emma suggested documenting Luna's progress for supporters. They started posting short updates, a photo of her stretching in the sun, a note about her weight gain, a story about how she'd investigated a new scent box. The response was overwhelming. Letters came from people who'd never seen a bobcat in person but felt connected to her story. Some shared their own healing journeys, drawing parallels between Luna's trust building and their own efforts to rebuild after loss. Luke read those letters at night. They reminded him that the sanctuary's role went beyond the animals in its care. It was a place where people could witness resilience up close, where they could believe that second chances were possible, not just for wildlife, but for themselves. And yet, even in those quiet months, the mystery persisted. There were reports from nearby facilities of attempted break-ins, unexplained damage to enclosures. Luke tightened protocols, added extra locks, and made sure Luna's pen was checked twice daily. He didn't say it out loud, but both he and Emma felt it, the sense that the danger that had found Luna once might try again. If there was another lesson here, it was this: healing doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you stronger. Yes, but it also makes you more visible, and sometimes that visibility draws new challenges. As Luna learned to climb higher, leap farther, and rest with her belly to the sun, Luke kept one eye on the perimeter. Her progress was real and worth every hour invested, but progress didn't erase risk. And soon, they would both find out just how quickly the shadows could return. Because one night, under the cover of fire and smoke, the sanctuary would be tested in a way that made the Gator Pond feel almost simple. The fire started the way danger often does, quietly, without warning, slipping in through the edges of an otherwise ordinary night. Luke had fallen asleep in the chair beside Luna's enclosure, a habit Emma teased him about, but never really tried to break. The rehab barn was calm. The low hum of fans, the rustle of hay when one of the deer shifted the steady breathing of the animals tucked in for the night. It was the alarm that pulled him up. Not a blaring siren, but the sharp, piercing cry of the sanctuary's old smoke detector, followed by the unmistakable smell of burning wood. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, scanning the shadows for the source. Out the barn window, he saw an orange flicker licking at the roof line of the main admin building. Luke moved fast. He called Emma's name, but the only answer was the growing crackle of flames. His phone was dead. The landline was silent. That's when the second realization hit: this wasn't an accident. Whoever had done this had cut their lines. He ran to Luna's enclosure first. She was pressed into the corner, her body low, eyes wide. Smoke curled under the door, and the faint pop of glass breaking somewhere outside told him the fire was spreading. "It's okay," he murmured, unlocking the gate. She didn't move. Trauma has a way of freezing a body, and Luke recognized it, the same paralysis she'd had in the water months ago. He crouched low, holding out his hand the way he always did. "Come on, girl. We practiced this." She inched forward, muscles trembling. Luke scooped her up and started toward the emergency exit that led to the back of the property. They were halfway there when he heard a sound that didn't belong: footsteps. Slow, intentional. A voice followed. Luke Bennett. It wasn't Caroline's voice. It was younger, sharper, carrying a heat that matched the flames. "I know you've got her." Luke's grip on Luna tightened. The exit was just ahead, the cooler air seeping through the cracks in the door. But then he heard it. Emma's voice, faint, calling from deeper inside. "Luke!" He stopped. Every rescuer's nightmare is the split-second decision: get one to safety or go back for another. The lesson drilled into him over years was clear. Save yourself first so you can help others. But the voice in his head, the one that had pushed him into the Gator Pond, said something else. You don't leave your own behind. He set Luna down by the exit, her path clear. "Stay here," he said, knowing she didn't understand the words, but hoping she understood the tone. She didn't run. She crouched there, watching him, the tip of her tail twitching. The heat was worse toward the center of the barn. Smoke curled low, making each breath a scrape. Luke found Emma pinned under a fallen beam in the supply room, coughing hard, her face gray under the soot. He wedged a pry bar under the beam and levered it up just enough to drag her clear. They staggered back toward the exit, Emma leaning on him, but the door was empty. Luna was gone. Then he heard the barking. Yah. Not a dog's bark, a bobcat's deep, throaty call when cornered. It came from the front office. Luke handed Emma off to the doorway, where cooler air promised safety, and turned back. Luna was there, caught at the end of a makeshift leash of electrical cord, in the hands of a woman Luke had never seen before. Mid-40s hair pulled back, eyes hard in the firelight. "Rebecca Marks," she said when she saw him, "Caroline's niece. My cousin died because of one of these monsters. You should have let the Gator finish the job." Luke took a step closer, the heat pressing in from the collapsing ceiling. "She's just a kitten," he said. "She's not the one who hurt him." Rebecca's grip tightened. "They're all the same." She pulled a knife from her jacket. Luna froze, her ears flat, her body low, but her eyes stayed on Luke. Here's where training meets instinct. Luke knew he had seconds before the roof gave way or the knife came down. He didn't argue. He lunged not at Rebecca, but at Luna, pulling her free as the knife's edge grazed his shoulder. The building groaned. Somewhere behind them, a wall gave way with a crash that sent embers swirling. Rebecca stumbled back, coughing, her eyes watering. Luke didn't look again. He tucked Luna under his arm and ran, ducking under falling beams, his injured shoulder screaming with each step. They burst into the cool night just as sirens cut through the air. Firefighters swarmed past, their shouts mixing with the hiss of water hitting flames. Emma was already being loaded into an ambulance, her hand lifting weakly in a wave. Luke sank to the ground, Luna still pressed against his chest. She was shaking but alive. He felt her heartbeat against his ribs, fast at first, then slowing as she recognized his scent, his voice. There's a small lesson buried in the chaos. Safety is not a one-time gift. You have to keep earning it over and over, especially for those who've known fear. Luna didn't just survive that night because Luke carried her out. She survived because months of small, consistent actions had taught her to stay close when it mattered most. Later, the fire marshal would confirm what Luke already knew: the blaze had been set intentionally. Rebecca was in custody, but others might still be out there. That knowledge didn't rattle him as much as it might have months ago, because now he knew what Luna could endure. And maybe that was the fresh perspective that resilience isn't built in the moments of rescue, but in the long, quiet days between them. It's built in the feeding times, the calm voices, the steady presence. It's what makes it possible to face the fire and still come through the other side together. As dawn broke, the sanctuary's charred buildings stood in stark silhouette. But in Luke's arms, Luna shifted, lifting her head to meet his eyes. She didn't look away. And that's when Luke understood they weren't just surviving anymore. They were choosing each other. The next step would make that choice permanent. The fire left black scars on the sanctuary's buildings, but it didn't burn away the one thing Luke and Luna had built together: trust. In the days after the rehab barn smelled faintly of smoke, despite the deep cleaning, and the hum of portable fans filled the silence where the old air system used to be. Volunteers came to help clear debris, their boots crunching over charred boards. Donors sent blankets, food, and handwritten notes from across the country. Luna stayed in a temporary enclosure in the quieter corner of the property, away from the noise of hammers and saws. Luke checked on her first each morning and last each night. She didn't flinch when he approached anymore. In fact, she would rise, stretch, and step toward him, not rushing, but purposeful, as if she'd decided his arrival was part of her day. Emma recovered quickly, returning to her duties with a stubborn determination that matched Luke's. One afternoon, as they stood by Luna's pen, watching her navigate a new climbing structure, Emma said, "She's picked you, you know." Luke tried to deflect. "She's a wild animal. Her future's supposed to be out there, not here." Emma shook her head. "Not every wild animal can go back, and not every human is the right match for the ones who stay. But she's already made her choice." The sanctuary board met later that week to discuss the situation. Policy was clear: permanent placement of wild animals required exceptional circumstances and a caretaker with specialized skills. Luke had both, but there was a question: would keeping Luna compromise the sanctuary's mission to return animals to the wild whenever possible? Luke listened as each member spoke. He thought about the other rescues he'd handled: the hawks, the turtles, the deer. He'd always known that part of loving them was letting them go, but this was different. Luna had survived deliberate harm twice, each time seeking him when it counted. She'd shown she could thrive here, but only here. The decision came down to a vote. It was close, but in the end the board agreed Luna would remain at the sanctuary for life under Luke's direct care. The relief Luke felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the steady kind that settles in your chest when something you've been holding tight is finally secure. There's a lesson in that kind of relief. Sometimes the right choice isn't about sticking to the plan. It's about recognizing when circumstances have changed enough to require a new one. The months that followed were full of small adjustments. Luna's enclosure was expanded with more vertical space for climbing and shaded areas for rest. Luke added scent trails and puzzle feeders to keep her instincts sharp. Visitors were allowed to see her only from a distance, and only if she chose to be visible. Most days she stayed in the shadows until she heard Luke's voice. Then she'd appear tail low, but relaxed, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knows they're safe. Community outreach became part of her story. Luke spoke at schools and nature centers about Luna's journey, using her as an example of why wild animal rescue matters not just for the animals, but for the people who learn from them. He'd tell students, "She's not a pet. She's a partner in teaching us what survival looks like." A real-life parallel came to Luke's mind often years ago. A sanctuary in Arizona had taken in a mountain lion cub orphaned during a wildfire. The cub had bonded closely with its caretaker, and though it would never be released, it became an ambassador for its species, helping raise awareness and funding for conservation. That cat lived a full, enriched life, not wild, but not diminished either. Luna could be the same for the Everglades. Emma noticed a shift in Luke, too. Before Luna, he'd kept a part of himself closed, still guarded from the loss of his wife. Now he seemed more present, more willing to share stories and moments. She teased him once, saying, "You've both been rehabbing each other." Maybe that was the fresh perspective. Rescue isn't a one-way act. Sometimes it's the human who gets pulled out of deep water even if their feet never leave the ground. Luna's progress wasn't without challenges. She startled at certain noises, the clank of a dropped tool, the distant backfire of a truck, and would disappear into her shelter for hours. But each time she returned a little sooner. Luke took those moments as reminders healing isn't about eliminating fear, but shortening the distance between retreat and return. The day she first approached him in front of visitors was unplanned. He was speaking to a small group about bobcat behavior when Luna appeared from the far end of her enclosure, walked the length of it, and sat down opposite him. She looked at him, blinked once, then turned her head toward the group, as if acknowledging them. The visitors gasped softly. Luke just smiled. She's saying hello in her own way. There's a quiet power in moments like that, not the dramatic rescues or viral photos, but the simple acts that show trust has taken root. Those are the ones that last. As autumn turned to winter, the sanctuary's repairs were nearly complete. The fire had forced changes, upgraded security, reinforced structures, better emergency systems. It had also clarified something for Luke. His role wasn't just to run the sanctuary. It was to guard the few souls who had chosen him as their safe place. One evening after the last visitors left, Luke sat by Luna's enclosure. She came to the fence, pressing her forehead against the mesh. He leaned in, resting his hand on the other side. "Looks like we're stuck with each other," he said. Her tail twitched once, slow and deliberate, before she moved back into the shadows. He didn't need her to stay visible. He knew she'd be there when it counted. And soon that bond built in fire water, and the quiet days in between would be tested one final time in a moment neither of them could have predicted. A year after the fire, the Everglades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center looked nothing like the blackened, smoke-stained grounds Luke had walked through that night. The rebuilt barns stood taller. The upgraded enclosures blended into the landscape, and the air smelled of marsh grass and cypress instead of char. But for Luke, the real measure of change was in the way Luna moved. On a warm spring morning, she stood at the far end of her expanded habitat, paws resting on a low platform, eyes fixed on him. There was no fence between them now, just a short stretch of open ground leading to the private training area. Luke unlatched the gate, stepped back, and waited. For months, they'd been preparing for this controlled time in the larger, semi-wild space where Luna could roam, hunt small prey, and choose her own path without leaving the safety of the sanctuary's boundaries. It wasn't release in the purest sense, but it was as close as she would get a chance to live more like a wild bobcat, without the dangers that had almost ended her life twice. Her first steps were cautious. She paused, often scanning the sky, the grass, the tree line. Then she moved forward. Muscles loose tail level, the posture of an animal that feels the ground under her feet and knows it's hers to use. Luke followed at a distance, not crowding her, letting her set the pace. In the wildlife world, this kind of moment is called a soft release. It's used for animals that can't survive entirely on their own, but benefit from more space and autonomy. Luke had seen it work before, like the injured red-tailed hawk the center cared for years ago. After rehabilitation, the hawk lived in a large flight aviary with open windows at the top. It could leave any time, but it always returned for food and rest, balancing independence with the safety it had learned to trust. Luna's version of freedom was similar. She'd spend part of her day stalking the tall grass for insects or lounging on sun-warmed logs, and part of it watching Luke work from her shaded perch. The choice was hers, and that Luke thought was the heart of true freedom. Not distance from what you love, but the ability to choose it again and again. Visitors who heard Luna's story sometimes asked why she wasn't simply released into the wild. Luke answered honestly. In the wild, her injuries and her fear of certain triggers could make her vulnerable. Here she gets to live as a bobcat, but without the traps that nearly caught her before. It wasn't the story people expected, but it was the one that made sense for her. There's a lesson in that freedom isn't always about removing every boundary. Sometimes it's about creating the right kind of space, the kind that allows growth without risking collapse. Luke saw that lesson play out in human form one day when a retired firefighter visited the sanctuary. The man had been injured on the job and couldn't return to active duty. For years, he'd felt useless, cut off from the identity that had defined him. Watching Luna that afternoon, he said quietly, "She's still who she was meant to be, just in a different range." I guess that's what I need to figure out for myself. That's the fresh perspective animals can give us. They don't waste energy on what they've lost. They adapt to what's in front of them, making the most of what's left. By late summer, Luna's movements in the larger space had become fluid and confident. She no longer hesitated at the gate. When Luke opened it, she'd slip through without looking back, not in defiance, but in trust, knowing he'd be there later. And when the day's roaming was done, she'd often return to her enclosure, unprompted, curl up in the same sheltered corner and watch the evening light fade. On the anniversary of her rescue from the gator pond, Luke decided to mark the day quietly. No public event, no speeches, just him, Emma, and Luna. They opened the gate as always, but this time Luna crossed the open ground without pause, stepped up to Luke, and pressed her forehead against his knee before moving on into the grass. Emma caught his eye. "That's her way of saying thanks," she said. Luke didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the arc of the past year. The split-second jump into the pond. The slow rebuilding of trust, the fire, the board's decision. The steady work of turning a frightened bobcat into an animal who could claim her own space again. It had been a journey measured not in dramatic rescues, but in the 1,000 quiet choices that made those rescues matter. If you strip away the fences and species, the core is the same for all of us. Healing takes time, and trust grows in the spaces where safety and respect meet. As the sun dipped low, Luna reappeared at the far end of the field. She walked back to the gate, slipped inside, and sat down facing him. She didn't need coaxing. She'd had her day in the open and was ready to rest where she felt safe. Luke closed the latch gently. "Welcome home," he said. The sanctuary would keep telling Luna's story, not because it was about drama or danger, but because it was about what comes after. The first steps back to freedom aren't just about the animal. They're about the people willing to create the conditions for those steps to happen. So now, maybe turn the question back to yourself. What's your version of that open gate, where in your own life could you create the space to move forward without fear? If Luna's journey stirs something in you, a memory, a hope, a decision you've been putting off, maybe today is the day to take that first small step. And if you believe in stories that connect us to the wild, to each other, and to the healing we're all capable of, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that second chances are real. The wildcat baby found hers. Yours might be closer than you think.
A tiny Mustang foal, abandoned and barely clinging to life, lay helpless in the middle of the wilderness. When a kind-hearted rancher stumbled upon the fragile creature, he made a split-second decision that would change both of their lives forever. Years later, as their paths crossed once again, what happened next was something he could never have imagined. This is a story of courage, resilience, and a bond so powerful it will leave you speechless. Stay with us for a tale that will warm your heart and bring tears to your eyes. The early morning sun had just begun to rise over the rugged plains, painting the horizon in soft hues of orange and gold. Sam Carter, a seasoned rancher with years of hard work etched into the lines of his face, was riding his trusted horse, Scout, along the outskirts of his sprawling property. It was a routine ride, one he often took to check on his fences and ensure no strays had wandered too far. The crisp air carried the faint sound of birdsong, and the gentle rustling of leaves was the only noise breaking the serene silence. As Sam guided Scout down a winding path near the edge of the forest, something unusual caught his eye. At first, it seemed like a mound of dirt or a cluster of rocks, but as he drew closer, he realized it was moving, or rather, trembling. His heart skipped a beat as he dismounted, the weight of his boots crunching against the dry earth. Lying in the grass was a tiny Mustang foal, barely able to lift its head. Its chestnut coat was matted with mud, and its ribs were starkly visible, rising and falling with each shallow breath. The foal's dark, fearful eyes met Sam's, filled with desperation and pain. It was clear that the little one had been abandoned, its mother nowhere in sight. Sam knelt beside the foal, his rough hands moving with surprising gentleness as he assessed its condition. There were no visible injuries, but the foal was severely dehydrated and weak. It wouldn't survive much longer on its own. Sam's mind raced. He knew wild Mustangs were fiercely independent, and intervening wasn't always the right choice. But looking into the foal's pleading eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. "All right, little one," he murmured, his voice soft yet resolute. "Let's get you out of here." With care, Sam wrapped his jacket around the foal, shielding it from the chill as he lifted its fragile body into his arms. The foal let out a faint whimper, too weak to resist. Sam placed it gently across Scout's saddle, holding it steady as he mounted behind. The ride back to the ranch was slow and careful, every bump in the trail making Sam more aware of how fragile the foal truly was. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the morning sun was higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the paddocks and barn. Sam carried the foal into the barn, where he prepared a makeshift bed of hay in an empty stall. He fetched a bucket of water and some milk replacer he kept for emergencies, carefully coaxing the foal to drink. At first, it resisted, its tiny body too exhausted to respond. But with patience and persistence, Sam managed to get the foal to take a few sips. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Sam said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He decided to name the foal Chance, a nod to the second chance he was giving it, and perhaps the second chance it was giving him. Over the next few days, Sam's life revolved around Chance. He woke up at dawn to check on the foal, feeding it every few hours and making sure it stayed warm. Slowly but surely, Chance began to improve. Its legs, once shaky and frail, grew stronger, and its eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now sparkled with curiosity. Sam couldn't help but grow attached. There was something special about the little Mustang, a determination, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. And though Sam had always been a practical man, not prone to sentimentality, he found himself talking to Chance as he worked, sharing stories of the ranch and the horses he'd raised over the years. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Sam stood by the paddock, watching Chance explore the grassy enclosure. The foal's movements were still cautious, but there was a newfound confidence in its steps. Sam leaned against the fence, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Saving Chance had reminded him of why he had dedicated his life to this land and its animals, the beauty of resilience, the quiet strength found in moments of vulnerability. "Looks like you're gonna be all right, kid," he said softly. Chance lifted its head, as if understanding the words, and let out a soft nicker in response. But as much as Sam wanted to protect Chance forever, he knew the day would come when the Mustang would have to return to the wild. Chance wasn't meant to live a domesticated life. It was in its nature to roam free, to run with the wind across open plains. For now, though, Sam focused on the present, cherishing the bond they were building and the lessons Chance was teaching him about hope, perseverance, and the power of a second chance. The days turned into weeks, and under Sam's care, Chance began to thrive. What once was a fragile, malnourished foal had transformed into a spirited young Mustang with a gleaming chestnut coat and a curious, determined nature. The bond between man and horse grew stronger with every passing day. Sam found himself spending more time at the paddock, watching Chance explore, play, and sometimes cause mischief, like knocking over buckets of water or nibbling on the edge of Sam's hat when he wasn't paying attention. One particular morning, Sam stood outside the paddock, leaning on the fence as Chance pranced around in the cool morning light. The Mustang had grown more confident, testing the limits of its new world. But Sam knew that for all of Chance's progress, trust was still a delicate thing. Wild Mustangs carried an innate wariness, and while Chance had warmed to Sam, certain movements or sounds could still send the young horse into a panic. That day, Sam decided to take the next step in their journey. He grabbed a halter and a rope from the barn, walking back to the paddock with a purposeful stride. "All right, Chance," he called, his voice calm but firm. "Let's see if we can't get you used to this." Chance raised its head, ears swiveling toward Sam as he approached. The Mustang nickered softly but took a cautious step back as Sam entered the enclosure. Sam knelt, holding the halter low, his movements slow and deliberate. "It's just me, kid," he said softly. "You've got nothing to worry about." At first, Chance balked, skittering a few feet away, but Sam stayed patient, waiting for the Mustang to make the first move. Over the weeks, he'd learned that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, step by step. He kept his posture relaxed, speaking in a low, soothing tone as he let Chance sniff the halter. Eventually, the Mustang inched closer, its curiosity outweighing its fear. "That's it," Sam murmured, sliding the halter gently over Chance's head. The Mustang flinched but didn't pull away, its dark eyes watching Sam intently. "Good boy," Sam said, giving Chance's neck a reassuring pat. "You're braver than most folks I know." The rest of the morning was spent walking Chance around the paddock, getting the Mustang accustomed to the feel of the rope and the sound of Sam's commands. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments when Chance would stop abruptly or pull against the rope, his wild instincts flaring up. But each time, Sam responded with patience, never forcing the horse to do more than it was ready for. By the end of the session, Chance was following Sam's lead with surprising ease. The Mustang's strides matched Sam's, and there was a calmness in its movements that hadn't been there before. Sam couldn't help but smile as he led Chance back to the barn. "You're getting the hang of this," he said, giving the horse a playful nudge. "You might just make a ranch horse out of you yet." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. Chance was grazing peacefully in the paddock, the golden light of the sunset reflecting off its coat. For the first time in a long while, Sam felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Saving Chance had reminded him of the joy and purpose that came with working the land and caring for its creatures. But even as he watched the Mustang, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. Chance was growing stronger and more independent every day. Soon, the question would arise, should the horse stay on the ranch, or should it return to the wild? Sam knew the answer wouldn't be easy. For now, though, he pushed the thought aside, choosing instead to focus on the present. In the weeks that followed, Sam continued working with Chance, introducing the Mustang to new challenges. They practiced walking through streams, navigating uneven terrain, and even trotting in wide circles under Sam's guidance. Each small victory felt monumental, a testament to the trust they had built together. One afternoon, as Sam sat on the paddock fence watching Chance, a truck pulled into the driveway. It was one of his neighbors, a rancher named Tom, who stepped out with a knowing smile. "You've got yourself quite the horse there," Tom said, nodding toward Chance. Sam chuckled, tipping his hat. "He's a handful, that's for sure, but he's worth it." Tom leaned against the fence, his gaze thoughtful. "You planning to keep him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sam didn't answer right away. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted finally. He's not meant to be fenced in forever, but letting him go, that's easier said than done. Tom nodded, clapping a hand on Sam's shoulder. You'll figure it out, you always do. That night, as Sam lay in bed, the question weighed on him. Chance had become more than just a rescue. He was a companion, a reminder of the resilience of life. But deep down, Sam knew the day would come when he'd have to make a choice. For now, he could only hope he'd have the strength to do what was best for the Mustang, even if it meant letting go. The ranch was quiet that morning, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the tall grass. Sam stood by the paddock, resting his arms on the wooden fence as he watched Chance explore the field. The young Mustang had grown stronger with each passing week, his coat now sleek and radiant, his strides confident and purposeful. But despite all the progress, there was something restless about the way Chance moved. His ears perked at every distant sound, his head turning as if he was searching for something beyond the confines of the ranch. Sam let out a slow breath, his heart heavy. He had been avoiding the inevitable, but it was becoming clearer with each day. Chance wasn't meant to live a life behind fences. The wildness in him, though tempered by trust, was still very much alive. Later that afternoon, as Sam worked in the barn, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Tom stepped out, carrying a small toolbox. "Fence still giving you trouble?" he called out with a grin. "Always," Sam replied, setting down his hammer. The two men had worked together on countless projects over the years, and fixing fences had become something of a ritual. As they worked side by side, Tom glanced toward the paddock. "He's looking good," he said, nodding toward Chance. "Almost too good." Sam paused, his grip tightening on the fence post. "What do you mean?" Tom shrugged, leaning on the post. "You know what I mean. That horse was born to run free. You've done right by him, Sam, but keeping him here? That's not who he is." Sam didn't respond right away. He knew Tom was right, had known it for weeks, but the thought of letting Chance go was a weight he wasn't ready to bear. "I just need more time," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam walked out to the paddock with a bucket of water. Chance trotted over to meet him, his ears flicking forward in recognition. Sam reached out, running a hand along the Mustang's neck. "You're getting too big for this place, aren't you?" he murmured. Chance nickered softly, nudging Sam's shoulder as if in response. Sam set the bucket down and leaned against the fence, his thoughts racing. The bond he had built with Chance was unlike anything he had experienced before. The Mustang had taught him patience, resilience, and a kind of quiet strength that he hadn't realized he needed. But as much as Sam wanted to keep Chance by his side, he knew the horse deserved more, a life beyond the boundaries of the ranch. The decision came 2 days later. Sam loaded Scout into the trailer and prepared Chance for the journey ahead. He had made arrangements with a nearby Mustang sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of protected land where wild horses roamed freely. It was the best option for Chance, a place where he could live as nature intended, while still being monitored and cared for. As Sam led Chance into the trailer, the Mustang hesitated, his dark eyes locking onto Sam's. "It's okay, boy," Sam said softly, his hand steady on the rope. "This isn't goodbye, not really." Chance stepped into the trailer, his movements calm but deliberate. Sam secured the gate and climbed into the truck, his chest tightening as he started the engine. The drive to the sanctuary was long and quiet. Sam glanced in the rearview mirror every so often, watching Chance shift slightly in the trailer. His mind replayed the journey they had shared, the day he had found the foal, weak and trembling, the long nights spent nursing him back to health. The first time Chance had trusted him enough to take food from his hand. Every moment felt vivid and raw, a reminder of just how far they had come. When they arrived at the sanctuary, a representative greeted Sam with a warm smile. "He's a beautiful one," she said, her eyes scanning Chance as Sam led him out of the trailer. "He's special," Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. The release was bittersweet. As Sam opened the gate to the wide expanse of land, Chance hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The Mustang sniffed the air, his ears twitching as he took in his new surroundings. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he broke into a gallop, his chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight as he disappeared into the distance. Sam stood by the fence, his hands gripping the rail as he watched Chance join a distant herd. His heart ached, but there was also a profound sense of peace. This was where Chance belonged, running free with his kind. On the drive home, the emptiness of the trailer felt like a hollow ache, but as Sam pulled into the ranch and stepped out of the truck, he looked around at the land he had built and cared for. Saving Chance had changed something in him, reigniting a sense of purpose and reminding him of the beauty of second chances. As the sun set over the horizon, Sam stood by the paddock, his thoughts drifting to the Mustang now running free. "Run far, kid," he murmured, tipping his hat toward the distant hills. "You've earned it." The ranch was quiet without Chance. The paddock that once bustled with the young Mustang's spirited energy now stood empty, a subtle reminder of the bond Sam had reluctantly let go. Days turned into weeks, and while the routine of ranch life carried on, Sam found his thoughts drifting to the sanctuary and the wide-open plains where Chance now ran free. Each evening, Sam would lean against the paddock fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He'd recall the way Chance had galloped into the sanctuary without looking back, the confidence and freedom in his stride. It was the right decision, Sam knew that, but that didn't make it any easier. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the sanctuary. The envelope bore the familiar logo, and Sam's heart skipped a beat as he unfolded the paper inside. It was an update on Chance. The Mustang had quickly adjusted to life in the sanctuary, integrating with a small herd of other rescues. The note detailed his progress, mentioning how he'd become somewhat of a leader among the group, his natural confidence and strength inspiring the other horses to follow him. Sam smiled as he read the words. "That's my boy," he murmured, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his pocket. Knowing that Chance was thriving brought a measure of peace, even if the ache of missing him lingered. A few months later, as spring began to bloom across the ranch, Sam received an unexpected visit. A truck pulled into the driveway, its dusty exterior hinting at a long journey. Out stepped a young woman in a wide-brimmed hat, her boots clicking against the gravel as she approached. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Rivers, from the sanctuary." Sam shook her hand, his brow furrowed in curiosity. "Nice to meet you, Emily. What brings you all the way out here?" Emily smiled, though there was a hint of seriousness in her eyes. "It's about Chance. We thought you should know something remarkable happened." She went on to explain how Chance had led his herd during a recent storm, guiding them to higher ground when floodwaters threatened their grazing area. The sanctuary staff had been monitoring the situation, but by the time they arrived, Chance had already taken charge, ensuring the safety of the other horses. "We've never seen anything like it," Emily said, her admiration evident. "It's like he's found his purpose out there." Sam listened intently, his chest swelling with pride. "He's always been a fighter," he said softly. "Even when I found him, barely clinging to life, he had that spark." Emily nodded. "We thought you might like to visit, see how he's doing. You're a big part of his story, after all." The invitation caught Sam off guard. He hadn't expected to see Chance again, let alone return to the sanctuary where he had left him. But as the idea settled, Sam felt a pull he couldn't ignore. "I'd like that," he said finally, his voice steady. The following weekend, Sam loaded Scout into the trailer and set off for the sanctuary. The drive felt familiar, yet different. The anticipation of seeing Chance again mingling with a quiet nervousness. When he arrived, Emily greeted him at the gate, her smile warm and welcoming. "He's out in the far pasture," she said, leading Sam through the sanctuary grounds. The land stretched for miles, a patchwork of rolling hills and open fields dotted with grazing horses. It was a sight that filled Sam with a deep sense of peace. As they approached the pasture, Sam spotted a small herd clustered near a grove of trees. Among them, a chestnut Mustang stood tall, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Sam's breath caught in his throat. It was Chance. The horse's posture was confident and regal, his head held high as he surveyed the herd around him. Emily whistled softly, and Chance's ears flicked in their direction. When his eyes landed on Sam, something shifted. The Mustang froze. His gaze locked on the man who had once saved his life. For a moment, everything else faded. The distant sounds of the sanctuary, the rustling of the trees. It was just the two of them, their bond spanning the distance. Then, to Sam's astonishment, Chance began to move. At first, it was a hesitant step, but soon the Mustang was trotting toward him, his powerful strides kicking up dust as he closed the gap. Sam stepped forward, his heart pounding. When Chance stopped in front of him, the horse let out a soft nicker, lowering his head as if in recognition. Sam reached out, his hand brushing against Chance's neck. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You remember me, don't you?" Chance leaned into the touch, his trust and affection clear. For Sam, it was a moment of validation, a reminder that the bond they had shared was unbreakable, no matter the time or distance. The visit was brief, but it left a lasting impression. As Sam watched Chance gallop back to his herd, he felt a profound sense of closure. Chance was where he belonged, living the life he was meant to lead. And while their paths had diverged, the connection they had forged would always remain. On the drive back to the ranch, Sam's thoughts were lighter. He had done his part, given Chance the chance to thrive, and in return, Chance had reminded him of the beauty of trust, resilience, and second chances. Life on the ranch settled into its familiar rhythm after Sam's visit to the sanctuary. Though he missed Chance, the closure he found in seeing the Mustang thriving brought him a sense of peace. The days were filled with chores, fixing fences, tending to the cattle, and training the younger horses on the ranch. But no matter how busy he got, Sam often found himself thinking about Chance. His sharp eyes, his proud stance, and the way he had galloped back to his herd after their reunion. Months passed, and spring turned into summer. The grass on the ranch grew tall, swaying in the warm breeze, and the sound of horses grazing filled the air. One particular evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in hues of gold and pink, Sam sat on the porch, sipping a cup of coffee. Scout, his trusted horse, grazed lazily in the paddock nearby. It was a peaceful scene, one that reminded Sam why he had dedicated his life to this land. As he sat lost in thought, a faint noise broke the quiet. At first, it was just the sound of hooves in the distance, a rhythmic, deliberate beat against the earth. Sam straightened in his chair, setting his coffee cup down. Scout's ears perked up, and the horse lifted his head, staring toward the far end of the ranch. The sound grew louder, closer, until Sam could make out the silhouette of a horse emerging over the ridge. Sam's breath caught in his chest. The horse was moving with purpose, its powerful strides kicking up dust as it approached. And then he saw it. A chestnut coat that gleamed even in the fading light, a white blaze streaking down its face. It was Chance. For a moment, Sam couldn't move. He stood frozen on the porch, watching as Chance slowed to a trot, then stopped just a few yards away. The Mustang's chest heaved with exertion, his nostrils flaring as he took in his surroundings. Sam's heart raced as he stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Chance?" he called softly, his voice trembling with disbelief. The Mustang lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto Sam's. It was as if no time had passed, as if their bond had been waiting quietly, ready to reignite the moment they saw each other again. Chance took a step closer, then another. Sam held his ground, his hands open at his sides, not wanting to startle the Mustang. When Chance finally reached him, the horse nickered softly, lowering his head as if in greeting. Sam reached out, his hand brushing against Chance's neck. The warmth of the horse's coat beneath his palm felt surreal. "What are you doing here, boy?" Sam asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you even find your way back?" He looked over Chance's body, noticing signs of a long journey. Dust clung to his coat, and his muscles were taut with fatigue. But aside from that, Chance seemed healthy, his spirit as strong as ever. Sam led Chance to the paddock, where he offered the Mustang water and a fresh pile of hay. Scout watched from the corner of the enclosure, his ears flicking back and forth curiously. Chance, however, seemed entirely focused on Sam, his eyes following the rancher's every move. Later that evening, Sam sat by the paddock, leaning against the fence as Chance grazed quietly. The stars above twinkled in the vast open sky, and the cool night air carried the faint scent of wildflowers. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Chance's return was more than a coincidence. Over the next few days, Sam reached out to the sanctuary to let them know what had happened. Emily was as surprised as he was. "Mustangs have an incredible sense of direction," she explained. "But for him to travel all the way back to your ranch, that's something special." Sam couldn't disagree. Chance had chosen to return, and Sam wasn't about to question why. He welcomed the Mustang back into his life, grateful for the second chance to care for the horse that had already taught him so much. As the weeks went by, Chance settled back into the rhythm of ranch life. He seemed calmer, more at ease, as though he had found his place in the world. Sam worked with him daily, strengthening their bond even further. The Mustang, once wild and wary, now followed Sam with unwavering trust. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Sam stood by the paddock, watching Chance trot across the field. The horse moved with a grace and confidence that took Sam's breath away. He thought back to the day he had found Chance, a fragile foal barely clinging to life. Seeing him now, strong and free, filled Sam with a sense of pride and gratitude he couldn't put into words. For Sam, Chance's return wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder of the unbreakable bond they shared. The Mustang had come back not out of necessity, but out of choice, and that made their connection all the more meaningful. As the stars began to appear overhead, Sam tipped his hat, a quiet smile on his face. "Welcome home, Chance," he said softly. "Welcome home." The morning sun rose over the ranch, casting long shadows across the paddocks and painting the fields in hues of gold. Sam stood by the barn, leaning on the old wooden door as he watched Chance graze in the open field. The Mustang moved with a calm grace, his chestnut coat gleaming in the warm light. It was hard to believe that just months ago Sam had let him go, only for Chance to find his way back. The bond they shared, forged through trust and perseverance, now seemed unbreakable. Sam couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude as he watched the horse. Chance had become more than just a part of the ranch. He was a symbol of everything Sam held dear: resilience, freedom, and the quiet strength that came from overcoming life's challenges. That morning, Sam decided it was time to take Chance for a ride. It had been years since he had worked with a Mustang so closely, and while Chance had always shown incredible spirit, Sam wanted to see just how far their trust could take them. He saddled Scout first, knowing his steady old horse would provide a calming presence for Chance. As Sam approached Chance in the paddock, he carried the saddle low, his movements deliberate and steady. Chance lifted his head, his dark eyes following Sam as he stepped closer. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured, his voice low and soothing. "Let's see what you've got." Chance stood still as Sam placed the saddle on his back, his ears twitching but his body relaxed. It was a stark contrast to the skittish foal Sam had rescued all those years ago. Now, Chance seemed to trust him completely, his confidence mirroring Sam's own. The ride began slowly, with Sam leading both horses out of the paddock and toward the open fields. The land stretched out before them, vast and untouched, with tall grass swaying in the breeze. Sam mounted Scout first, giving Chance time to adjust to the situation. Then, with a steady hand, he climbed onto Chance's back. At first, the Mustang moved cautiously, his steps deliberate as he adjusted to the weight of the saddle and Sam's presence. But, as they made their way deeper into the fields, Chance's confidence grew. His strides became longer, his movements more fluid, until he was trotting alongside Scout with ease. By the time they reached the edge of the property, Sam felt a familiar exhilaration building in his chest. He nudged Chance into a canter, the wind rushing past them as the Mustang surged forward. For the first time in years, Sam felt truly free, the burdens of the past falling away with each stride. The ride was a testament to how far they had come, not just as horse and rider, but as partners. Sam had saved Chance when he was at his weakest, but in many ways, Chance had done the same for Sam. The Mustang had reminded him of the importance of patience, of the beauty in second chances, and of the unbreakable connection between man and nature. When they returned to the ranch, Sam dismounted and led Chance back to the paddock. The Mustang snorted softly, nudging Sam's shoulder as if to say, "We did good." Sam chuckled, running a hand along Chance's neck. "You've got the heart of a champion, boy," he said, his voice filled with pride. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. Chance stood in the paddock, his silhouette framed by the golden light of the setting sun. It was a moment of pure peace, the kind that reminded Sam why he had dedicated his life to this land and its animals. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet moments like this. Sam and Chance continued to work together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. And while Sam knew the Mustang would always carry a part of the wild within him, he also knew that Chance had chosen to stay, a decision that meant more than words could ever express. One evening, as Sam stood by the paddock, watching the stars blink into existence above the ranch, he found himself reflecting on everything Chance had taught him. The Mustang had shown him that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, trust, and care. And in return, Sam had given Chance the freedom to be himself, unrestrained by fear or doubt. As the years went by, Chance became a fixture on the ranch, a constant reminder of the power of resilience and the beauty of second chances. Visitors to the ranch would often marvel at the chestnut Mustang, captivated by his strength and grace. But for Sam, Chance was more than just a horse. He was a friend, a teacher, and a symbol of everything that mattered most in life. One day, as Sam leaned against the paddock fence watching Chance graze peacefully, he tipped his hat and smiled. "You and me, kid," he said softly. "We've been through it all, haven't we?" Chance lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting Sam's. And in that moment, no words were needed. The bond they shared said everything. Years passed, and the ranch remained a sanctuary of peace and purpose. Sam's days were slower now, but the rhythm of life on the ranch continued, steady and familiar. Blaze had grown into a powerful Mustang, his chestnut coat gleaming under the sunlight as he ran freely across the fields. He had become more than just a horse. He was the heart of the ranch, a living symbol of resilience, trust, and second chances. Sam often found himself sitting on the porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand, watching Blaze graze or gallop across the land. Visitors to the ranch always asked about the striking Mustang, captivated by his strength and presence. Sam would tell them the story, his voice filled with pride and emotion, about how a fragile foal had entered his life and changed it forever. Blaze's legacy stretched beyond the ranch. His story became one of hope for others, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there's a chance for redemption and renewal. And though Sam had faced many challenges over the years, he knew that saving Blaze had been one of the greatest decisions of his life. One quiet evening, as the stars began to scatter across the sky, Sam leaned against the paddock fence, his gaze following Blaze as the Mustang trotted across the open field. The bond they had forged through trust, patience, and love remained as strong as ever. In Blaze, Sam saw the reflection of everything he had learned, that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that last a lifetime. "Run far, kid," Sam said softly, tipping his hat. "You've earned it." This story of Sam and Blaze isn't just about a horse and his rescuer. It's about hope, trust, and the power of second chances. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the bonds we share with the animals and people in our lives. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in the beauty of redemption. Let's keep spreading stories that remind us of the incredible strength of love and compassion.